Hello and welcome to Moonface Designs. In this video we're going to be thread painting Willow. Now if you were following along with my first video you will have discovered how I've collaged Willow. And at the end of that particular video I was talking about making a quilt sandwich ready for the thread painting. You'll notice that I've got a slightly different wadding or batting for my quilt sandwich than the one that was on my previous video. So I'll just show you what I said I was going to use in the previous video. It was going to be this, which is a polyester batting. If you look at it, it's actually quite thin, which is great, that's what we want. It had a slightly larger loft than this, but obviously because it's synthetic, as soon as you put heat on it, it tends to take the loft out. So I quite like using this actually, but I'm coming to the end of it now. I had two pieces of it and I was explaining it's probably best to have your batting all in one piece. I was concerned that it might leave a noticeable line when I come to thread paint. And at that particular time I hadn't joined them together. I have now joined them together and you can see it works really well. And I guess it depends on what you're going to use it on, but I think if it's going to be artwork that's hanging on the wall, then perhaps it's not a good idea to have a join in it. So I discarded that and then I decided I was going to use some fleece that I had. In theory it's not ideal because it is a dark black fleece and I've got a light coloured fabric over the top. When I've put it on there I don't think it looks too bad, so I am going to continue with this. But ordinarily I think I would probably be better off with a white backing. So this is fleece and it's an anti-peel fleece and it's quite nice to use. It makes your stitches look really nice. So there's all types of batting or wadding that you can use. You can use a bamboo, you can use an 80-20, you can use the one that I showed you just now, which is totally polyester. And actually I've known to be using pillowcase protectors. So what I would say is, if it's quite a soft back, then I don't see any reason why you couldn't use it. It might be worth just having a little play and maybe cut off a piece of it and cut off a piece of fabric that you've used in your collage and make up a little sandwich and see what you think. Have a little thread paint on it and have a look. Fleece isn't particularly the right thing to be using, but to be perfectly honest with you, as long as you're happy with it and it gives you the results that you like, then who's to say what you should and shouldn't use? My collage is about an inch all the way round bigger than I actually want it to be. So that's why my batting isn't much bigger than my actual fabric, because sometimes when you're thread painting it does tend to shrink a little bit. But then I can cut off the excess that I don't need. If you're making something that is the exact size that you want, I would suggest that you have some overlap around the edges with your batting, just to allow that when you're thread painting, it might possibly shrink just a little bit. So that said, we'll get the sewing machine set up and then I'll explain how we go about the thread painting. One thing I didn't explain was attaching your collage to your batting. Now, you could use a spray adhesive, and that's pretty good for holding everything in place. The only thing I would say about that is that it is quite smelly. You could end up getting high and having a very nice, happy time in your sewing room. I don't actually like it. It gives me a headache, but it has got quite a strong grip, so that would be quite nice. So what I do is I use quilting pins, and they are slightly curved so that they're easy to get in and out of the fabrics. You will have noticed that when I was talking to you just now. I'm going to assume that you don't really know anything at all about thread painting, but I'm guessing that if you already have a sewing machine anyway, you probably understand about it. We'll just go from the beginning. So the first thing you need to do on your machine is to drop your feed dogs. Now, on an older machine, there is usually a switch around here somewhere. If you take this off here, if you can't find it, it will be here somewhere. On the newer machines, you've probably got a switch on your screen that you can press, which is the same as mine here. If you've got a really old machine and you can't drop your feed dogs like that, all I would suggest you do is to put something over the top of them so that it stops them coming up and grabbing your fabric. But don't forget, you still need to have a hole where your needle goes up and down. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself into a whole lot of trouble. I like to use a foot pedal when I'm doing thread painting. A lot of machines have got an on and off switch, so you don't actually need to use a foot pedal. Mine has one of those, but I prefer to use a foot pedal. And the reason I prefer to use a foot pedal is I personally think I can control the speed of the needle, and also I will have two hands free for manoeuvring my quilt. On some machines, mine has it as well, I can increase or decrease the speed that the needle goes up and down. I tend to set that to about a medium. What that means is when I put my foot hard down on my pedal, it's not going to take off at a horrendous speed. So when you set it at the medium speed, that's as fast as it will go. So let's just assume that I had it on the fastest and I was having trouble making sure that my foot was at the right level or the right pressure on the foot pedal. That would mean that my needle would go up and down at all different speeds and probably not be able to control it very well. So with it on medium speed, I can put my foot hard down and it's not going to go any faster than that. So that's how I control it. The thing is, at the end of the day, it's practice. You will actually get to know what pressure your foot needs to be at to get it comfortable for you. And the last thing I would say is some machines, and mine is included in that apparently, have a stitch regulator where, depending on what fabric I'm putting through it, so for instance, if I'm putting a silk fabric through that's very light and wispy, the foot pressure and the feed dogs will work automatically to get the right flow of that fabric. And then obviously by the same token, if I'm doing something a lot heavier like denim, it will also adjust what it needs to do to get that to file through smoothly. So in theory, it will adjust to how you're moving your fabric through. However, what I found, and I can't speak for anybody else, but what I found is that that doesn't work for me. So the fact that it's got a stitch regulator that might be automatic and might be working, I find that obviously if I'm making the needle go up and down a lot quicker and I'm only moving my fabric through slowly, then my stitches are going to be very small. By the same token, if I've got my foot on the pedal and the needle is going up and down very slowly, but I am moving my fabric quite quickly, then I'm going to get larger stitches. So what I would suggest you do is find out what speed works for you best for you to get the best control of your quilt. Some people say it's easier to thread paint when you are going quicker. And that might be the case for some people. But if you feel that you can't do that because you can't get your quilt in the right place at the right time and you end up with something that's unsatisfactory, then slow down. Don't worry about how anybody else is doing it. Work out a way that suits you best. Usually with every new project that I do, I like to change my needle, because if you have a blunt needle, that can make a big difference to skip stitches and all sorts of things. So the next thing we do is we make sure that our bobbin thread is the same as our thread that we're using on top. I have to confess I don't always do that. If I'm doing, like at the moment I shall be doing a brown horse, then I would choose a brown thread to go in my bobbin and just change the top thread. I am trying to change the error of my ways. I've come unstuck a couple of times when my tension hasn't been correct. So you can slightly see the bobbin thread on the top. What I've been doing is I've bought bobbin cases and some extra bobbins, and I've been making up some. So really there's no excuse. I can find something that is the same, or if not, very, very close to it, to use in the bobbin. And I am trying to get into the habit of changing that. Also, I use some gloves when I'm thread painting. They're relatively cheap to buy, but I can assure you they make a big difference to holding on to your collage. What I've done is I've cut some fingers off, my thumb and my 2 fingers, because when I'm changing bobbins and thread, it's easier to do that than have to keep taking on and off my gloves. So I've chosen the thread that I'm going to use, and I'm going to start with this piece here, which is the same colour, you can see, and it's under her chin. If you just wanted to quilt, then you could just go around the edges of each piece if you wanted to. I actually like to thread paint because I personally think it adds more dimension to the collage. When I'm doing an animal, I try to thread paint in a way that the fur would grow. I don't thread paint the nose and the mouth. Obviously, if there's slightly thicker hairs on a nose or whatever, I can also add those in afterwards with some thread. You can see here that the piece is actually telling you it needs to go this way. So I go up and down in the same place a couple of times. Now that locks that stitch in there. That is because I have an automatic thread cutter on my machine. In theory, you're supposed to pull up the thread from underneath, and then afterwards you can hide it in amongst all of your collage. That is the right way to do it, but there's no quilting police, and to be perfectly honest with you, my thread is locked in and I'm quite happy that that is secure enough. If you were doing this with a machine that hasn't got an automatic thread cutter on it, I'm not too sure whether you might end up with some nests on your stitching underneath. Again, it would be something that you need to trial and error. I'm happy with that. It is a quicker way of doing it. My quilts generally go over canvas or in a frame, so the back isn't necessarily needed to be absolutely 100% perfect. If you were going to enter into a competition, then obviously I would urge you to make sure that you do it properly. But if it's just for your own personal use, or you're making it for a gift or whatever, then do it the way you want to do it. Do it the way that makes you happy. Because at the end of the day, we're all doing this because it's something nice that we enjoy and we want to be happy. We don't want to be tied up in knots with, oh, we should do it this way, we should do it that way. We should do it the way we want to do it. And if we're happy with the outcome, then so be it. So I've got my machine set at middle speed, and I'm going to show you fairly slowly what I do. Now, obviously, you are responsible as to where you put your fabric, which means that will dictate where your needle goes. As you can see, the needle is going up and down, probably at the same speed, more or less, and I am moving my fabric at the same speed, more or less. So we can see that we've got nice size stitches. What that means as well is if you make a mistake, you can easily get your seam ripper in there and take out some of the stitching. So you've come down in a straight line, or let's put it this way, as straight as you can, because when you first start out, your lines won't be straight. Mine still aren't straight sometimes. So don't overthink that. Just think about getting your technique right first. Once you've got your technique right, then you can start to hone in a little bit on each piece of that technique to make it better. Hopefully that makes sense. So we want to go backwards really. So I'm going to put my foot down again, get it going at the same speed, and then I'm going to come backwards. So we just come down again. Just speed up just a little bit. Now, if I don't want to go backwards, or I've tried it and I'm a little bit worried about it, then we can always turn our, as long as we've got the needle down, we can turn our collage around the other way and come back down straight again. And we can carry on doing that as much as we want to, especially if it's a fairly small piece. And you can stop and you can have a breather. The other thing I would suggest is try not to make your lines too close to each other, because if they're too close to each other, you've got to then carry on doing heavy thread painting everywhere else. So try and make the gaps between your first amounts of thread painting quite generous, and that means that then if you want to make it heavier, you can add in some more stitching instead of trying to take that stitching away. So obviously, because she's a horse, I'm not going to do all long stitches up and down there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up a little bit, and then I'm going to come down at a slight angle and then go up again, and then maybe come down again and go up again. I'm going to come down again, just randomly going up and down like that. And that just gives a little bit of extra interest to your stitching. Once you get a little bit more at ease with doing things, you can speed it up a little bit. So I've gone up and down a couple of times in that stitch, and then it's cut the thread for me. So shall we turn it over and you'll be able to see the back? Now you can see here, this is where it's cut the threads. There. And another piece here. So if I wanted to tidy that up, I could quite easily get my little scissors. I've got some great little scissors that I picked up off of Amazon, and I can just cut those off. Because I know that I've gone up and down a couple of times in those places, I know that that is actually secure. Now what I have noticed actually, for some reason, you've got some quite large stitches. Now that might have been where I moved the fabric too quickly when the needle was going up and down. It might be that I haven't got it threaded properly, so I will check that in just a second. But let's have a look at these ones here. You can see that my stitches are all fairly similar size. So if I turn it over the other way, hopefully you can see that as well. So I finished off this piece here, and I did the other little piece that was next to it, just down there. And I've just started on the neck piece. I'm not going to go up and down in straight lines this time. I am going to follow the shape that's been cut out there. So just gently maneuver it with your hands. You can stop. If you're getting to the stage where you think that you can't control where your needle's going, you can always stop, readjust, and then carry on. And as I say, you can always flip your collage around and then work forwards towards you if that's what you find easier to start with. It is really a good idea to learn how to go backwards and forwards and sideways. But if you've actually made a nice collage and you're worried about spoiling it, then If this makes you happy, you can do this. All I would say is maybe get yourself another sandwich and have a little play going backwards and forwards and side to side, and then that way it won't matter if you make a mistake on that particular one. So I'm going to go down the shape, and then I'm going to come back up again, and then I'm just going to echo what I've already done. And actually, once you've already done it, you end up getting some muscle memory for what you're doing. So actually going backwards isn't as difficult as it might look. Usually when you do quilts, you start in the middle and you work out, and that is so that you can make sure your quilt is nice and flat and you don't get any rucks in it. When I'm doing my thread painting, if I've got another similar piece of fabric, so I've got another piece here that's similar, I will try and stay within that area if I can. And what I do is I usually put the threads that I've been using into a little tub so that it's easy to find it again if I need to do it on another piece of fabric that's further out on the collage. So I don't start traditionally in the middle and work outwards. I do dot from piece to piece. You just have to be really careful that it is flat when you do it, so that when you come and do your next pieces, you're not going to get a bump in it. But again, if you're worried, start in the middle, find the colours that you need and just do one piece and then change your colour and move on to the next piece. The reason I don't do that is because it takes so long to do that. As you're probably aware, if you've watched my other videos, sometimes I'm a little bit impatient. Or there's another saying that says, work smarter, not harder. And that's okay, providing you can keep everything flat. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to follow the shape of the horse's head. And notice I'm going nice and slowly so you can see what I'm doing. And I will go backwards. And honestly, it is all just down to practice. And the other thing I would say is, I personally don't think you can mess up your thread painting. I think it absolutely adds texture to your collage. So if you're doing an animal and you kind of follow the way the hair or the fur grows, then there's no reason why it wouldn't look lovely when you're finished. My sewing needles are organ and they are embroidery anti-glue, and they are size 75/11. Other brands might say non-stick or something like that, and actually they are really good to help with stopping your needle gumming up. Now, I don't have too much of a problem with that because I use Bonder web on the back of my fabric. I do find that I have terrible trouble with my scissors and my needle if I use something like steamer seam. I find that quite tricky to use. I'm not sure whether it's the climate in the UK or whether I'm doing something wrong, but I have followed the manufacturer's instructions and I still find it really, really difficult to get on with steamer seam. If you're deciding that that's what you like and that's what you want to use, then anti-glue coated needles are the way to go. And then I would also have some alcohol, not to drink, by the side, and then you can keep swabbing down your needle if you need to. I find that it gives me slip stitches, and so I'd rather not use it. But again, it's all down to preference. I thought I'd change colours now and we can have a look at doing some of the black thread for the mane. What I have noticed about using the fleece instead of using my normal polyester backing is that the collage tends to move about a bit more on it. With my polyester backing, it tends to stick a bit better. So if you are going to use fleece, just make sure that you keep everything smoothed out and maybe use a few more pins. That'll be okay. I'm quite happy now. I can deal with that. So I've changed my thread and I've changed the bobbin thread, so they are both black now. There's not really a lot to thread paint with this. Maybe a line of thread up the middle, so making 3, because they are really quite fine. Now this one is just starting to lift off just a little bit, so that happens sometimes. I think it depends on how much I steam everything. I use this, which is a sew line glue pen. I'm guessing you could use a normal glue stick that children use when they're at school. This one is actually blue and it turns clear once it's dry. I like using this one. It's only small, which means I can get to the areas that I need to easier. And then I just pop it down. That just helps until I get some stitches into it. Just going to go round the edge. I'm going to go back up again instead of coming all the way down, just because it's easier to make sure this bit is pinned down properly first. And I think I'll move up here to this one. I can honestly see that I'm going to have to readjust the background fabric. You can see, look, it's all rucked up there, before I carry on and do that piece. But I'm making this as flat as I can so that I can still continue. Probably would be a good idea to stop and repin. When I've done all of the black pieces and they're all sewn down nicely, what I will do is I will add some extra ones with just thread by themselves. But I'm not going to do that until I've done the background, because if I start doing little wispy ones now, when I come to do the background, I'm going to end up going over the top of them. So it's just a case of trying to get things done in the right order. So this part of it is fairly simple. I don't think there's much of a worry really on doing anything complicated with Willow, with the thread. Just really to get some texture on her, that's all. I'm going to have to hop over that one. And then this bit goes over the top. So I'll do this piece, and then I'll come back to that piece and do that piece. And the same here. So you just need to keep the continuity going. If it looks like it goes underneath, then make sure that your stitches look like they go underneath as well. Now this piece that goes down here, I am going to do it this way, because obviously that is the way that the mane would grow. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do straight lines, I'm just going to come over it in a little arch, as that is the way that the mane would grow, wouldn't it? Just gently moving it backwards and forwards. Again, we'll put some more wispy bits on once the background has been done. I'll bring it up so you can see. You can just sort of see there, look, if I hold it in the light. Another tip I'd give you is when you're doing something like these two here, for instance, they're very similar, but they are slightly different shades. If you're going to use two different shades to thread paint this, you can, or you could use, perhaps have the lighter one and then do the lighter one on the top. I'm not sure how I'm going to proceed just yet, but let's assume we're going to use two different colours or two different values of brown to do this piece. We would check out which way the fur grows, so I'm guessing it would be kind of this way, up and down. Now, you can always come past the line of the fabric and just come into the next piece, maybe a couple of rows if you like, if that's the best way to explain it, of stitches. And you can do the same on the other piece. And when you come down to the bottom, you can extend it down the bottom a little piece into all the other pieces of fabric around it. And the reason we do this is so that when you do the next piece, again, you would bring it over to this piece just a little bit, and then it starts to blend everything a whole lot better instead of having stopping and starting at different pieces of fabric. So I'll continue with the black. These pieces here I'm going to just go around because it's the nose, and we've got a piece here on the eye that I'm just going to go round that. And then it's just a case of choosing a myriad of browns really to do most of the other thread painting, and then obviously the last few bits and pieces are the white, and then we can concentrate on the background. So I'll crack on and get some of this done, and then I'll come back to you and you can take a look and see what I've done. So I got a bit carried away and I've actually done all of the thread painting on the horse now. I'm fairly happy with how she's turned out. You can see on this piece here that instead of going straight up and down, I've taken the thread painting in a slight circle. So I've been doing that whilst it's been on the machine. The black piece here, again, I haven't come out straight. I've gone down like this so that it kind of gets a bit of movement within the stitches. I've tried to match up thread as much as possible, but this piece here was two pieces, but I just continued with the same colour over that one. On this brown piece here, instead of having a brown, I picked out some of the reddy colour because obviously we've got red here, and used red on this piece here. You can see on the eye and on the nose that I've literally just gone round the pieces just to give a little bit of definition, but I haven't done too much on that at all. You can see as well that the gaps between my rows of threads are quite generous. It wasn't so time consuming, and also the other thing is you want to be able to see the fabric underneath. It's still quite pliable, but actually it's going to be going onto a frame. Even if it was very stiff, actually that would be quite helpful. If this was to be a quilt that I was going to use, it would be fine. Now if I flip it over, you'll be able to see the back. So you can see where actually I've been a pretty good girl actually, and I've tried to change most of my bobbin to a similar colour. So, and you can see that I've actually done that. There are quite a few little nesty bits, if you like, if that's what you want to call them. That is because my machine cuts them from underneath. And now I could go round with my pair of scissors and I could cut those off, or I could spend ages undoing them and then bury them with a sewing needle. But as I said, it's going onto a hardback or over canvas, so I'm not going to worry about it. It doesn't make any difference at all to the front looking really nice. I am having trouble with the rest of the background. Actually, it keeps slipping on here, and even when I put my numerous pins in it, it still rucks up and has been slipping. So actually, when I come to do my thread painting, I am going to do it without anything in it. So I'll do this bit because it's nice and flat, and then I'll carry on and do some more. Obviously the back is just going to be free motion quilting. It isn't going to be thread painting because obviously there's nothing to thread paint. In fact, I'll just show you how I'm going to do this. I'll make a start on it because if you haven't done any free motion quilting at all, it might help you to see how I'm going to do the background. So I'll get my machine set back up again and then we can have another look. So I've moved the camera a little bit just to see that we can get in by the needle, and I'm not quite sure how that's going to look when I come to edit it, but hopefully you'll be able to see a little bit easier. So as I've said before, with free motion you are responsible for putting the fabric where you want your needle to go. So I'm going to do the meander, and I think that's probably one of the better and easier ones to start with. Now, sometimes it might make it a bit easier to use your finger to draw where you want to go, and that'll give you a bit of muscle memory. I'm going to start right up against the collage so that it looks like I've put the collage on top of the background. Now, some people do that. They would quilt the background first, especially if they're making a quilt, then attach your collage on the top. The only thing I would worry about that would be that you would be able to see the quilting through. But actually, because although this isn't very dense, there's a lot of it and it's quite stiff, maybe you wouldn't see it. It might be something worth investigating. But this is the way I do it for the moment. I always do the collage first and then I do the background afterwards. So I'm going to put the needle down right up close to my collage, and then I'm just going to simply randomly move my fabric. So I'm going to kind of go around in a little bit of a circle and then come back on myself and then do another piece and then maybe come back on myself again. I think the thing is as well is not to overthink it too much, and just really go where your machine and your hands want to take you. So I'm doing it fairly slowly so that you can see what I'm doing. And like I said before, I can just stop and I can readjust my quilt or whatever, especially if you're doing a slightly bigger one, it makes it a little bit more difficult. And I can just check where I've been and then I can just carry on again. And the more you do of it, so I'm going to go right up to the edge again. And just keep going round and back on myself until I've filled up the whole piece of it. So my meanders tend to be fairly round. You could do square ones if you find that easier to do on your machine. But this would be something that would be nice to do with just a little plain sandwich. You can do a little bit of thread painting on it, and then you can try out your meander or any other fairly simple free motion stitching. See, because I'm starting to think about it more now, I've just kind of gone like that. But that doesn't matter, because when you carry on and work around it and you look at it as one whole thing, you won't actually notice that. So I'm going to pick up a bit of speed. Just try not to touch any other lines that you've already done. Let's go right into the corner now. I'm probably going to be cutting some of this off, but it's just better to make sure that you've covered it all, because what you don't want to do is try and put it on a frame or something and find that you've got some bits missing. So, I mean, I could go in here, just slow it down a little bit and then come back out again. But I think it's probably better if you don't think about it quite so much and just literally just keep moving your hands about. As long as you kind of move it at the same speed all the time, your stitches will be fairly similar size. But literally it is just practice. Practice, practice, practice. And as I've said in the past, I don't actually think that you can spoil your collage. However you do it, I think it will just add a nice bit of texture to it. And another thing that we're good at doing is we're very good at pointing out our mistakes. Don't do that, because I've done it so many times where somebody has said to me, oh, that's lovely, and that's what they actually truly think. And then I've said, yes, but I've made a mistake, and then I point it out. I think a lot of the time it's a good idea not to point these things out. They probably wouldn't have noticed. And if they do notice and they say something to you, unless they're a very good friend, a very, very good friend, then I think they're just being rude. You've taken a lot of time and effort to practice and do these things. So always compare from where you started to where you finished. So let me explain that sentence. So let's say that you've made one or two of your very first collages, and then you've done a bit of thread painting. Then in 6 months' time, if you've kept those collages, which I have, in fact, I might show you one day, my very first collage with my thread painting on it. And it's really nice now to put it up against how far I've come. I do look at other people's work, and there are some really wonderful artists out there, but I never think, oh, they're much better than me. What I think is, oh, one day I think I'll be as good as that. They give me inspiration. It doesn't make me feel as if I'm a bad collager or a bad free motion quilter or thread painter or anything else like that. It just means that they are a bit further along their journey than me, and so perhaps they've had many more years under the needle. Some people are just gifted and can produce beautiful things every single time, but I expect if you talk to them honestly, they will tell you that they have the same trials and tribulations that you have or have had. If you're not happy with your final collage or whatever, don't be down-mouthed about it. Just think, okay, I've learned so much this time. I'll do things slightly different next time. And that's the way you improve. Right, so if I show you now what I've done, my stitches are quite big. They are actually all very similar. Let's see if I can move the light a little bit. They are all very similar in size, but they are bigger than my thread painting. And that is because I didn't have my speed of my needle quite as quickly as I was moving my fabric. There's nothing wrong with it. It looks absolutely fine because they are all the similar size. I'm going to continue with this and I will show you the finished piece in just a second. So here's Willow all finished, and I've now cut it down to 16 by 20 inches so it'll sit nicely in a 16 by 20 inch frame. Once I'd finished all of that, I gave it a nice press. By pressing it, what it tends to do with the thread is it tends to seep into the fabric. I'm not quite so sure whether that is the right word, but it just makes the thread look like it's supposed to be there, if that makes sense. So there we go. I hope it's been a useful exercise for you. I would urge you to make a few quilt sandwiches and just have a little play. It's all very well watching somebody else do it, just have a go. Thank you for spending time with me. It's been great fun spending time with you. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.